That's Dick Kirby, by the way.
Hi, Dick.
Don Venne. All set?
Go. We're on.
This morning, we have as a guest here this morning, Don Venne. B-24,
Venne,
B-17.
but that's all right.
Venne?
Yeah, as though it were V-E-N, that's fine.
All right. I'm going to be asking you, for the record here, again, this is for the Library of Congress, too. They're going to have you repeat your name, birth date, and rank.
Okay.
Everything but the serial number.
I can remember it.
Okay, this is March 7th. Dick Kirby's here running a camera, and you can't see him, but Sandy Sanborn is here doing the narration. Don, to start this off, tell us about, you told me you grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. Tell us about how your grandparents got there and how your parents got there and what they did, and a little bit about your childhood.
Oh, my. Well, my mother was 100% Irish. My dad was half French and half Irish. And so the Vennes came, I'm not sure when, from France, but went to Canada and migrated down into the States from there. My mother's grandparents came from, probably landed in Boston and migrated some way to Minnesota. And they were married in probably about 1917 or 18. They had 4 children. I'm the third oldest, 2 boys, 2 girls. And we lived, as I mentioned, in Duluth. And of course, during the Depression years, and life was pretty stable. We had a great childhood. It was a great place to grow up. All of the winter sports, and summers were short, but I have no bad memories of childhood. It was great. Graduated from high school in 1941, and of course, it wasn't long from June to December that Pearl Harbor happened. And so my generation of friends, boys of course, were all headed for the service unless they had something pretty seriously wrong.
We're bypassing a little bit here, Don. Tell us what brought your ancestors to Duluth, and then what they did, especially what your parents did, and maybe a little bit more about your growing up. You kind of passed over that pretty fast.
Well, I'm not sure how they migrated to Minnesota. My mother's family was a large family of 8 who grew up in southern Minnesota, in the area of Zumbrota, Red Wing, in there. And there were 6 girls, 2 boys in the family. There's one living still just in Plymouth, outside of Minneapolis, who is now 96. My mother lived to be 103.
Wow, that's remarkable.
And hopefully she's passed on those good genes to me. And my dad died at about 66. But my mom was a school teacher in southern Minnesota, the old one-room school where you had all 8 grades, or maybe even kindergartners in the same room. She had to show up for work and get the fire started in the stove and so forth. And she did that for a couple of years, and then I'm not sure how she found her way to Duluth, but my dad was born there and grew up there. Had only an 8th grade education, and then, as a lot of people at that time, went to work. He worked for 17 years with the Mesabi Iron Range Railroad that carried ore from the Hibbing area, or up on the Iron Range as it was called, down to Duluth. As I mentioned, they had 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. And my memories of Duluth and growing up are, I have fond memories. It was the neighborhoods didn't change much. Some of the kids that I started in kindergarten with, when I go back to reunions in Duluth, even just a couple of years ago for my 60th high school reunion. Some have remained in Duluth, but I see boys and girls, both that in the primary grades and some even from kindergarten. So things were very stable. I only remember one house being built in our neighborhood during those years. And of course, attended Fairmont Elementary School, West Junior High, and then Dentfeld High School, and I graduated in 1941.
Okay, just about that time, a little bit after that, came December 7th, 41. What do you remember about that day, Don?
Well, I remember I was at a movie with the then girlfriend, and the news of Pearl Harbor came, and it was it was quite a shock to everybody, of course, but everyone was aware of what was happening in Europe, and most knew that at some point we would be drawn into it. So, but I had been working in a shipyard in Duluth after I got out of high school. We were building Coast Guard cutters at Zenith Dredge Shipbuilding. And so I worked there for nearly 2 years before I went into the service, but all my friends were leaving or were gone, and I decided to enlist in the service.
You enlisted in the Air Corps then, 1943?
Yeah, well, into, you're familiar with the cadet program.
Yes, I am.
Right, well, you had to take a written test first, and then you had to pass a physical exam, and if you were successful in that, then you would be inducted or go into the service into the Air Force in the cadet program, which I did.
And I'll bet you, you said you went in at Fort Snelling, I bet you took the train to Amarillo.
Yes, took the train to Amarillo, and we're in basic training in Amarillo, and my life as a cadet was short-lived. They had a test called a psychomotor test. You're familiar with that, I'm sure.
I am.
At any rate, I think at that point it was used more to weed people than to, my understanding was that it was for the purpose of deciding whether you get into pilot training or going to be a navigator or a bombardier.
Can you describe that test a little bit?
Well, I'll never forget somebody came into the barracks at about 3:34 in the morning and woke a whole bunch of us up and said, you're going to be given a test this morning. Words to that effect. And it was a test that supposedly measured coordination and some other features, I suppose, but I remember that one particular test looked like the old 78 record, and then in the middle of the record, or on one side of it, there was like a brass disc implanted, and you were giving a little tool like this, and as that thing was going around, you were supposed to keep that on there, and there were a number of them. And it wasn't a few days later we got results, and at least 2/3 to 75% of the people that were in our barracks or in our group all were told that they did not pass. And so it wasn't very much longer, and we were off to gunnery school. I don't know how many of that group would have gone through the full cadet program, because you lose track of everybody, you know.
Where did you go to gunnery school?
So we went down to Laredo, Texas, also by troop train, of course.
Did you fail the psychomotor test?
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
I guess so,
Okay.
because
I didn't get
that was it. No,
Okay.
it was a disappointment, of course, but as you look back, maybe things are supposed to work out that way. At any rate, we went down to Laredo, Texas, and began our training as gunners. I think that was about a 4.5 month to 5 month period, and almost every day there was something different, some form of shooting. You know, it could be trap shooting, could be skeet shooting. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. And it was, and then my very first ride in an airplane came back in the back of an AT-6 with a .30 caliber machine gun, firing at a tow target, I think it was, and had to be. So each day was a little different. Sometimes we were out on the range firing a 30 or a 50 caliber machine gun. You want me to pause?
Keep going.
You're okay, go ahead.
But it was it was quite an experience. We all knew ultimately what the purpose was for, and that we would probably end up on a crew of some airplane. Didn't know what. Anyway, that, as I mentioned, lasted for about 4.5, 5 months. And then there's the word I was looking for. Then we were sent to Tonopah, Nevada.
Tonopah. Never heard of that.
Well, it's up there in the middle of nowhere.
Was that where you formed your crew up?
Right. When we got to Tonopah, that's the point at which you meet 9 other guys that are going to be a part of your life for quite a while. And you see the other crew members for the very first time. But there was an incident that has stuck in my mind with Tonopah. As I arrived at the base and reported in, was told where the barracks was going to be, and I forget whether I walked or if I got a ride there. But I walked in one end of the barracks, walked clear through and out the door at the other end, and it was a Quonset hut, of course, and watched the B-24 take off, get up about 300-400 feet, watched it tip right on edge, and auger in. And
Boy, what a greeting to that new airplane.
that's right. And I thought, my God, what am I doing here? Well, you know, through all of the years, you know, I remembered that story, and then you begin to question yourself. You know, did that really happen? Did I see that? And so, just a few years ago, I got in touch finally with a waist gunner on our crew, and we were talking, and he said, you know, when I reported to Tonopah, he said I was in a truck being hauled, you know, someplace, and he says I watched the B-24 take off and get up a few hundred feet in the air and crash. And I said, oh my God. I said, you know, we saw exactly the same thing. And, you know, it had to be, because he was just reporting there also. Anyway, that verified for me that, yeah, it did really happen.
Did they ever determine what caused that?
No, and there were other crashes. In our training at Tonopah, there were any number of times that we were unable to complete a full training mission because something always seemed to go wrong. These were all B-24Ds, and they, you know, never sure. At any rate, it seemed hard to complete a training mission. Something would always go wrong. But eventually, and this was another about a 4.5, 5 month period, we completed the training. As it happened when we first got together as a crew, you meet the pilot, the co-pilot, and so forth, and the pilot is the commander, and you got 4 people. You know, you have a radio operator and an engineer, flight engineer, who they know where they're going to be, of course, but then you have 4 gunners, and someone has to take the ball, someone has to take each of the 2 waist positions and the tail. And if no one says that I would like to fly this or that position, then it would be up to the pilot as the commander to say, okay, you're going to fly here and you'll fly here. But anyway, I was obviously the smallest person, and I had been in the ball in gunnery school. There was one hanging from a tower, and so that I knew that I fit. I only weighed 131 pounds, and so I'd said that I'd fly in the ball. And once you pick a position, at least in our case, it may vary in some, but then that's the spot that you kept or maintained.
When did you head for England, Don?
Well, we went. As I mentioned, this lasted about 4.5, 5 months too, and then we were sent from there to Hamilton Field in San Francisco, just above San Francisco in California, of course, and fully expected to go to the South Pacific. We were issued all of this light clothing and so forth to go there. Well, there were about 100 crews there at Hamilton. Only they lopped off 10, of which we happened to be one. And we went down to Oakland, I'm sure, and got on a train and ended up in Brockton, Massachusetts. And so we were there only a short time, a week or so, and left from a ship on the USS Uruguay for England. And it was a 14-day.
You went in convoy then?
Yeah, in a convoy, right. And yeah, as I mentioned, it took a couple of weeks, and we landed in Liverpool. And from there, they distributed those 10 crews, and two of the crews, one of which was our crew, ended up at a base called Cheddington, which was about 30 miles north and a little bit west of London. And it was called the 406th Bomb Squadron, not group, just squadron. And it happened to be a night flying outfit.
You still had the lightweight clothes?
No,
Well, when did
I
this,
wonder what happened to those.
were you still on the B-24s then?
Yeah, we were in B-24s, and so we found out as we got there that there were both B-24s and B-17s at this base, and they were painted solid black, and they were what was happening, they were altering the B-24s. They were taking the nose turrets out, and they were, wherever this was being done in England, I'm not sure, but then they were ferrying them down to this base. Well, they had crashed 2, maybe even 3, just getting them there. In fact, one of the crews that we had started with in Tonopah was ferrying one of them down. It was just a skeleton crew, and they had to crash land. And the radio operator, who was a very good friend of mine, did one of those superhuman things. He was trapped under the top turret, and the oxygen was burning, and he lifted that off of him. The pilot, and the co-pilot, and the radio operator, and they had a whack with them. Crawled out the side windows, sliding windows on the B-24, and the radio operator was the most seriously injured. He was hospitalized for quite a while. But later, some of them tried and just to see if they could get through that sliding window, and were unable. So it was I don't know, it was a strange thing, but it was one I'll never forget. And I communicated with Pop Sandemeyer for a long time after. Anyway, what happened? And so after that crash, they grounded all the 24s. And in the alteration, something must have happened, because the crashes just wouldn't have happened unless something was, happened in the alteration. Anyway, they grounded those, and so the pilot and the co-pilot checked out in a B-17. And prior to that crash, we had flown our first 2 missions.
You flew two missions in the B-24?
Yeah, right. And those were down to for new crews, they usually sent you on a shorties, and so they were down. The first was to Brest, France, and Saint Nazaire.
Were these night?
Lorient. These are
missions?
at night, and they were. Those were where the submarine pens were. France, that part of France was still occupied. This was probably about the end of June.
44?
Yeah, 44. Well, anyway, the pilot and the co-pilot, it only took them a few days, and they checked out in the B-17. We were then given a 17 that we inherited, of course, called the Miss Mickey Finn, and that became our plane. It had a crew chief that stayed with it, and
How many,
well, to explain this, there's a book now written, and I have it. It's called Secret Squadrons of the 8th. This was the so-called psychological warfare thing. We dropped, in our particular case, we never dropped a bomb. We dropped canisters full of whatever, leaflets, of course. This was propaganda. We dropped currency. We dropped a newspaper called the Flying Dutchman that had been an underground newspaper in Holland, and when they were occupied, then they continued to print it in London. And so one of the 12 planes that was flying, if they could get all 12 in the air, they'd would always be dropping the Flying Dutchman at some point over Holland. So we dropped, it could be arms to the French underground. It could be, these were canisters that would be about, say, 12 to 14 inches in diameter, and nearly the full length of the bomb bay would be just crammed full of whatever was being dropped.
Well, that's very, very interesting. I've not heard that before.
Yeah, and sometimes we would have as many as 3 targets in a night. So it was a little different situation, and once you got, or in my case anyway, and the rest of the crew, I'm sure, once we got used to the idea of night flying, then it, I don't know whether you just become used to it or what, but you settle into it. And so instead of having to fly 25 or 30 missions, we had to fly 250 combat hours. And this is so, each flight was measured in minutes. And I still have a record of every single flight, the exact time we took off and the exact time we landed, because different from looking at the number of missions, you looked at the number of hours. So instead of taking say 30 missions, as it was, I think, at the time, it took 42 missions for us to finish 250 hours.
Well, that was a little unusual to be flying at night with the 8th Air Force. What kind of navigation equipment did those 17s have?
Well, I don't think he had anything. We had the beginnings of radar. And of course the Germans had it too, and we could detect when they were tracking us with radar, with their anti-aircraft. It was a thing called a boozer, and it was up in the pilot's compartment, of course, and he would indicate to the crew when it was, I think there were, an orange light would come on, and then a red light. When he would say the orange light is on, they're tracking us. And when the red light would come on, we knew they were actually firing. And he said, "I'm going into evasive action." And he'd either drop, 3,000-4,000 feet, pull off one direction or the other, and sure enough, then you'd see the flak at where we were. And
chaff? They dropped some chaff?
Yes, we did drop chaff. It was different. Night flying, you see, we flew singly. This was not as in formation.
Oh my, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So on any given night, you may have, 25, 30 different targets if each plane was going to say 3 or something like that. But so it could be, when France was occupied, it could be any place in France or in Germany or wherever. Sometimes what would happen as we would take off just about at day's end, and as long as it was all prearranged, of course, we'd have to leave the coast at 10,000 feet, and so there was no forming. And this was part of the thing about hours. We could do in say 6 hours that would take the day guys maybe 8 or 8.5. So we would leave the base, leave England at 10,000 feet, no matter whether we were going out over the Channel or going out over the North Sea, and then be climbing on our way. And by the time we were, say, hitting France or whatever, we'd be flying at 25,000 feet.
How often did you have to shoot at somebody?
Rarely. This is one of the, you could call it a good feature, call it what you want, but there was less fighter activity simply because I don't think Germany, they did have night fighters, but we had on any number of occasions we would have German fighter planes come and fly off our wing, and the pilot had an unwritten rule: if they don't bother you, you don't bother them. But they'd be, we were told in briefings following, as you know, not in briefings, but after the flights, post-briefing, whatever you'd call it, that the Germans had 10 or 11 B-17s that they had resurrected, and one that had either, you know, maybe not crash landed, but were ferried on down. And that fighters probably did not attack because they didn't know what they were, that it could well be Germans.
Well, now let's identify that B-17 there on the picture, Don. They tell me that's the F model. It doesn't have the modified
That's
nose
right.
configuration.
And that's what we flew in. We did not have, we flew in an F. It did not have the chin turret. And that was the only change really made between the F and the G was the chin turret. So, but you know, people ask as we take them through the 17 here, you know, when did you get in the ball, and why did you have to get in so soon? And you know, there was traffic over, a lot of traffic over England, and at that point, we'd get in the ball right away, or in any of the positions. At that point, you're looking out for other planes. So because mid-air collisions were not uncommon, they happened, and so. But then by that time, you're in your position, and you just stay there. Because sometimes flights, the shortest was about, well, those first two in the 24s were about between 4 and 5 hours, and the longest was just short of 10 hours.
Don, do you care to make any comparison between the B-24 and the B-17, as long as you had experience on both?
Well, from a personal point of view, the ball turret on a B-24, you know, you have to let it down, and then it retracts when you're ready to land back into the plane. You have to crank it back up, and it hangs on from 4 rods, and it was pretty shaky. Whereas in a B-17, it's fixed. It's hanging from a solid column that's anchored to the top. And well, we learned to like the B-17 a lot more than the B-24. It just, there's something a little more secure, not only about the ball, but the whole plane. And that looking at it, the big wing on a B-17 gives you a little more comfort than, although the B-24, you know, was a great airplane. The B-17 has gotten a lot more publicity, of course, than a B-24, but there was nothing wrong with the B-24. It, especially if you talk to B-24 guys, you know.
When they took the nose turret out, did it get tail heavy?
Well, you know, there was, I don't know what they had to change. You know, we flew on what were called the D model B-24s up in Tonopah. And that did not have a nose turret. It had a tail turret, all right. But something happened, or they felt something was happening with weight change or whatever. It wouldn't seem like it'd be that, although those turrets were heavy. And during the rest of the time that we were there, no B-24s flew.
Well, you made staff sergeant, and then after you were discharged, or give us a little process here, you came back from England, presumably, or you came back before the war was over?
Yeah, we flew from shortly after D-Day until December. So there was a 6-month period, and we were able to get our 250 hours in. And as I mentioned, it took 42 to do it.
Was all this night flying?
It was all night flying, right.
What happened shortly after D-Day?
We began flying shortly after D-Day.
Oh.
I mean, our first mission was, so we flew from, say, the middle of June to December. Anyway, well, when we finished, we waited around there for a while, and we became one of the crews that was sent back to the States, and a replacement crew came in. I came back on also on a ship called the General Brooks. It was a Navy transport, and the only able-bodied people on it seemed to be the flight crews that were returning. They had German prisoners, they had I think Italian prisoners, they had American GIs that had committed crimes that were being sent back, and so we had, I guess you'd call it sort of a KP duty. They used us to transport food up to some of the wounded, and also to the wards. It was a strange situation, but it was not unpleasant. Anyway, we got back to the United States. I remember, of course, coming into the harbor at New York and seeing the Statue of Liberty. And then had a furlough back in Duluth, Minnesota. My parents were still there. And then went right back to Laredo, Texas, to this same gunnery school, but this time to become an instructor gunner, and finished that course, and then was sent to Las Vegas Army Air Base, which was a base for B-29 gunners. And so I sat the last probably 7 months of the war in Las Vegas. The atomic bomb was dropped, and shortly after, had enough points because of for every air medal and for having been in the European theater and all of these things that added up to a lot of points. So I was able to get out in September of 1945.
When you were on operations, how often did they schedule you? Every day, every other day, every Thursday?
Well, a lot of it depended on the weather. We would fly as many as 3 nights in a row. I know I spent my 21st birthday in 5 different countries: England, France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany, because I flew on the day leading into the birthday, and it was after midnight before we got back, and then the next day flew again. So, but overall, I would say that the night flying, I probably, in terms of casualties, was less. It was different in that it was at night, and you had dealt with some other factors. We had to, before we started in flying, we had to take classes on what's called night vision, learning to look at things in the dark. You use more of your peripheral vision to see. The thing of getting caught in searchlights was, well, you don't get used to it, but it was weird. I mean, you just don't see anything. So we would, I was down in the ball. It was boom right at me, and so I'd keep one eye covered so that I wouldn't lose the night vision.
Was the searchlight ever able to track you?
Yeah, the searchlight would pick you up like this, and they'd follow you as far as they could until, we just got beyond them. And we had there were a couple of, experiences. I don't know if you've ever heard of the FOO lights, FOO. Well, on 2 different occasions, we experienced that, and of course reported it when we got back. It's a strange thing, but between the tail gunner and I were the ones that, of course, could see this, but and we were in communication, and I saw this. It looked like a bright star or a bright light, and he was seeing it, I was seeing it, we were talking about it, and the navigator would give the pilot some course changes, which should change that, but it stayed off of our tail, straight off our tail, even through those changes.
That is weird.
Was it a searchlight?
No. They, and in fact, I just read about it again here the other day. And it's a strange, FOO, F-O-O. What you're talking about. But it was, the best way to describe it is a bright light that followed you.
Like it was airborne?
Like it was airborne, yeah. It had to be. We were up there, 25,000 feet.
Could you see any?
I've read about them too, huh?
Could you see any tracking curve, any kind of estimated distance behind you?
No, except it felt like it was not that far off the tail. It would be, almost impossible to judge the distance. Quite a few times, at night, then we went where the RAF were going as well, and that was the RAF flew at about 18,000, and we were up at 25, and you can't believe the looking down and seeing the fires that were burning, and targets over Germany. And the flak was bursting down there at about 17, 18,000, and we were sitting up there feeling safer.
They must have taken quite a beating at that altitude.
Yeah. But and there were times also that we would, and coming back into England, our own base would be so socked in that we would have to land someplace else, and so there are any number of times that we would land at a base other than our own, and a few times they were at RAF bases, and had a chance to then, if we'd spend just a little bit of time there before we'd take off the next morning.
Did
Crawl
they ever
through
talk
Lancaster.
About those Foo lights? Did the British ever talk about them?
I don't know whether the British did, but it was just a strange phenomenon that probably has never really been explained, except that a number of people have seen them, and I have read about them.
Was it like St. Elmo's fire kind of thing?
No, it was like best described as a very bright star, yet close enough that, and you knew that it was off your tail, and it followed with direction changes.
Was FOO an acronym for something?
Not that I have heard of. They just, and whoever tagged the name FOO on it, I don't know. Maybe have you ever heard of the Fate magazine? Well, it's a magazine that I've subscribed to for 40 years or more, that does follow strange things, even UFO sightings and so forth like this. But the FOO lights have been mentioned in that publication any number of times, and so it's a real thing, but unexplained as far as I know.
Both sides reported it and thought it was the other side. I read that.
Yeah, have you?
Thought it.
Yeah, well,
Thought
see,
it was us.
you have heard about it.
Yeah.
Well, Don, after September 1945, when you were discharged, then track us through up till today, if you will, please.
All right. Just before the war ended, my parents had moved from Duluth, Minnesota, to out here just outside of Redlands, California. So when I got out of the service in Las Vegas, I came to California rather than going back to Minnesota. Okay, University of Redlands was right there, just a couple of miles from where my parents had settled. And so on the good old GI Bill, I went to the university. My parents had a little chicken ranch, and so I lived at home. I only had 2 miles to drive to school. And so I helped my dad and mom expand the chicken ranch so that they could make a decent living. And I went to the university. I graduated in February of 49. My major had been in geology, and I spent from February to June looking for a job, and there were none to be had, and needing to go to work. And since California was expanding population-wise, it needed teachers. So I spent the summer taking a few classes in education, the how-to classes, how to teach math, how to teach reading, and was hired in Crestline, California, a small elementary district, as a school teacher. Then I, not having had any, practice teaching, which was the usual route, there wasn't time. It was pretty tough at first, but I managed that first year and then decided to continue. So after teaching for about 6 years, then I became the elementary principal and did that for the next 12. So I was at the same school and area for 18 years. Watch families come and grow. And then a position opened in the district office, and I was selected. I became the assistant superintendent of, and by then it was called Rim of the World Unified School District. It included Crestline, Lake Arrowhead, and Running Springs. Our kids used to have to, after they finished the 8th grade, take a bus from up in the mountains down daily to San Bernardino. Well, when we unified and formed our own district, we built a high school, and so kids could be educated from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I stayed with the district in that job for, well, a total of 32 years. Retired at 57, and haven't looked back. We made our home in the mountains for 35 years, and then we'd come to the desert out here for to get away from the crummy weekends or weather in the weekends, and bought a mobile home in a park that a friend was building. Never thinking it would be our retirement home, and that is what has happened, and I've been out here now full-time about 10, 12 years.
How long have you been a member of the museum staff?
Began coming over here before it actually opened. You know, the preparation of, they were trying to gather volunteers, and heard about it, and so I've been here since before the opening day. I've always worked on Fridays. Used to work a half a day, and now it's a full day on Fridays. I've been doing it ever since.
So you got in on the initial planning and everything?
Well, not when they were still in downtown Palm Springs, but when the building was going on here, and it was a few months before the opening.
What was that day?
November, this is Veterans Day. Was it 6 years ago, whatever that is? Yeah.
57 or 90.
Well, there were, you know, some old timers. Martin Wilson, of course, was here, and he recruited me for the 17 right away. And
did you ever meet Bob Pond?
well, not to say hi, Don. My name is Bob, although he has spoken a few times. Yeah, we did. You know, I'd been into his place over there for in those early years when they could handle the crowd. They had the year-end parties there.
He's a Minnesota boy, you know.
Right.
Shattuck Institute at Faribault. That's where he graduated.
Oh, I know that the museum used to be there at Eden Prairie.
Yeah, Flying Cloud.
And there's another guy named Miller from Duluth, and I think his first name is John, that was in our graduating class that volunteered at Eden Prairie.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, Don, you look like you're in good health. Tell us a little bit about your family and what you do for recreation.
Okay, well, we have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. They were all born in the little hospital up at Lake Arrowhead. They've all currently they've all graduated from college. Our oldest daughter, right here at Palm Desert at College of the Desert, got her RN. She worked for a year at a desert hospital, and then joined the Air Force.
Really?
Yes. And she has just retired as a full colonel after about 24 and a half years.
She get on flying status?
Well, she's only 4'10", so she wanted to be in what they call the these nurses that fly and you know.
Flight surgeon?
Yeah, and the name escapes me. At any rate, she was in Germany at Wiesbaden with her family for 5 years, and had some experiences there because as some of these victims of bombings and those that were held captive over there for a while, they would thread them through the Air Force Hospital at Wiesbaden to check to see if they were physically okay before they came back. And so she met a number of those. She was stationed as the assistant chief nurse at the Air Force Academy for a couple of years.
Super.
And she was then over in Osan in South Korea as the commander of the hospital there, and was the first woman Air Force squadron commander. Neat little girl.
Well, that is quite an accomplishment.
Went to the War College, went up to Albuquerque and finished her degree and picked up a master's, all in the same program. And that was the first woman that had ever done that as well. Yeah, she's a neat little gal.
What are your other kids doing?
Well, my second boy is what they call, the second child is got a degree in music, but he went into computers and was what they call a DBA. He's a database administrator and works for Toyota company now. The third boy, or the third child, as a boy, is a CPA. He lives down in Temecula, and I'm going to take my taxes to him this weekend. And the fourth is a school teacher right over here in Palm Desert. She's been teaching there about 16, 17 years. We as a family traveled as much as we could. In the jobs that I had, I would have, up to 5-6 weeks off in the summer, and we'd take off with a travel trailer and see the country. We have been in all 50 states now. But my wife and I travel with an RV, and
Is that what you do for recreation?
yeah, pretty much. And we cruise. We just took a 64-day cruise.
64 days.
Yeah, we left from Vancouver, British Columbia, went over to Russia, to Petropavlovsk, and then down to Japan, to South Korea, over to China, Cambodia,
Good sakes.
Australia, New Zealand, Tahiti, Bora Bora.
I never heard of such a cruise.
It's
We
great.
used to dress for dinner a lot of times.
18. Yeah. Yeah, that one set us back, but it was worth it. I don't like to fly, so I wouldn't have gotten there any other way.
Well, Don, this has been most interesting. We're pretty close to winding up this tape, and
Yeah, that's
anything
good.
else you want to say in closing?
No, except there is a book, as I mentioned. It's called Secret Squadrons of the 8th.
I've got that written down here.
And it deals with the 406 Bomb Squadron and the kinds of things that they did. There's just, in the last few minutes, I'll talk about the commanding officer of the base when I was there. And this was a small enough, since it was only a squadron, he became acquainted with the people. And unfortunately, he was lost coming into England at 10,000 feet at the exact moment either a bomber or it was a German plane was leaving England, and British anti-aircraft got him instead.
Oh, boy.
He crashed into the mouth of a river, and the only thing recovered was his Boy Scout ring.
Which
And
one?
there's just recently, this was covered in the Air Force Association magazine. You may have read about it. Yeah,
What was his name?
and it was Aber, Colonel Aber, A-B-E-R. Few people knew that the Air Force did have a night flying outfit, and that's the kind of thing that they were dropping. It was the so-called psychological warfare of the time.